Hey, Bryan. Dane here. We have so much in common, but let's start with one thing we don't have in common. I can't wait to die. I do think life is an incredible opportunity to work through a lot of shit, but it's incredibly tough, and I can't wait to see what's on the other side, which, based on all the NDE literature, seems to be utterly fantastic. So I'm not trying to avoid dying. However, like you, I've had conversations about suicide, and what I do appreciate about bringing death into focus is the challenge to either do something worthwhile or die if that's not possible. And so when I have these conversations with myself every number of years, the equation is basically I've experienced a lot more pain than well-being. I don't believe in playing games that are fundamentally more painful than valuable or pleasurable. And so far, how I've resolved that conversation is much like yourself. You are doing something extraordinary, and it's worth living for. I mean, I think what you're doing is worth living for. You've come to that conclusion. And that's basically the conversations that I have when I say, shit, right? Another failure, another reenactment of trauma. This doesn't seem to be breaking as a cycle. It's painful as hell. What am I doing here? Why just keep going through this cycle? And I bonded to you. And by the way, I have a beautiful bouquet, which when I looked at it, I thought, this is perfect for Bryan. So you can tell me if you agree. But just look at these colors and see if they don't fit your temperament. And I'll just share that my greatest bonding with you came in one of your conversations with Chris Williamson. So I can't hold these here, unfortunately, although I'd love to. But just look at these gentle blues. I added this. The rest I picked just because I thought it was such a nice bouquet at the florist's. But yeah, I saw your sweetness, and like you, I would say at least 90% heterosexual. So this isn't a romantic gesture, but at times in your conversations, your gentleness, your feminine side, your sweetness really comes through, and I think that's worth fighting for, right? And so I like it that you've made it this campaign to, in your way, fight for the best part of you. And as it turns out, we're in the same mission. And I think there's a special place in the world of evolution for people that are close to death. And it's this sense of, nothing to lose. Like, if I died tomorrow, I think my well-being would probably improve enormously based on my own experience of meditation, based on the statistics in just the pain-pleasure ratio of my life, which began with very early childhood trauma. And this creates a constant skew, right? Because early attachment trauma, early abandonment trauma, early violence, again and again and again without repair, complex PTSD, and then later in life developing PTSD as another reenactment and overlay of that. Just means that my body is constantly in this, state of expecting harm, expecting violation, expecting abandonment. And so even though that has happened probably only 1% of my life, the constant framing of that, in the traumatized body means that my life is hellish as a felt experience, even though outwardly it couldn't be better. And that's part of the craziness that's difficult to deal with, is people on the outside, look and say, wow, you've got this, you've got that, you've got this. And it's like, I don't care about any of that. I just care about the fact that my felt experience is of a shamed, traumatized child, expecting to be hit, waiting to be hit. And it's got this constant kind of pace of energy. And it's tiring, it's painful, it's exhausting. And so, I really related to what you said with Chris around, the many Bryans, but also this paradigm of the blueprint. And this is where we converge, meaning, I think that many people would be much happier dead than alive. It would be such a relief, frankly, to die. However, it is, the way I've always resolved it in my, inner dialogue is one part of me wants to die, lists all the reasons. I say, good on you. I understand. I get it. Completely understandable. No questions. I get it. And fine. That's on the table. Does any part want to live? Why? But more importantly, because there's always some voice that wants to live and some voice that wants to die. More importantly, what are you going to do for this part that wants to die? You understand why it's painful to live in this body. You understand why it's painful to be anxious all the time. You understand that this part has done more than 1,000 separate actions to mitigate these pains. And most of it hasn't worked or hasn't worked sustainably. And just as an aside, I've done more life hacks than anyone I know, other than, with YouTube, I have the benefit of getting to know people like yourself. But I've never met anyone who has done more therapy than I have. I've never met anyone who has done as much bucket list work as I have. I've never met anyone who has done so much conscious engineering as I have. I've done so many of the things that are the throwaway, try this diet, do this, do that, hit this level of success and you'll be happy. I've done a lot of that. And one of the biggest things was, reaching a certain financial threshold and realizing that I felt worse rather than better, right? And so when so many of those steps have been tried and failed to live up to the hype, there's depression and exhaustion, right? Because I've done all of those things and another 100 things that you haven't mentioned, and I feel like shit. And, and that's a very lonely place to be, because the people who haven't done all of those things still believe that with a certain amount of money or a certain kind of lifestyle that they'll feel fantastic. And I know that isn't the case. They don't, but I do, right? So my hope is lower. And I also know they don't really want to hear that. And so I'm more isolated because I'm not trying to shove this down someone's throat. So it's incredibly painful living in the little intersection of trauma and unique experiences and success and the like, and sensitivity, right? And I also see that you're an unusually sensitive person, and you're also way more resilient than I am in terms of criticism. I have probably 1,000th of the tolerance, somewhere between 100th and 1,000th of the tolerance that you have for hate, shame, attack, etc. And I'm both happy and sad that you have that, right? Because on the sociopathic empathic continuum, to survive a sociopathic environment that is predominantly fear-based, one must dissociate from a lot of oneself and a lot of the cult or culture. And so, there's a trade-off there. And, you're winning in your metrics because you've made that trade-off of, both dissociating in some ways, but also, I don't know if it's gamifying or the like, but, you've managed to create a persona or an identity that, quote, enjoys hate and enjoys that type of energy coming towards you. I don't, right? That re-triggers the abandonment, terror, and trauma of being, violently hurt by my mother at 2 years old. And, that kind of hate nearly killed me. And it's dissociative, it's overwhelming, it's incredibly traumatic. And, all of the shame around one's supposed to be an adult and grow up and all that just adds another layer of anxiety, because of course I'd like to feel like an adult. Of course I'd like to put that behind me, but I've made a very clear commitment never to lie. And the truth is, I feel like a 2 to 12-year-old most of the time. And there was enough shame, trauma, and abuse in those ages that puts me in a state or a predisposition of loneliness, fear, humiliation, shame, terror, trauma, just this constant waiting to be hit type of energy. And it's terrifying. And, in order to survive that, I have developed some mental chops, a large amount of strategy to kind of cope with some of that. But one of that has certainly been the periodic suicide conversation and what are the pros and cons. So your big mission, not to die, I'm so glad I have that as an option. I'm looking forward to it. Where do we converge? I think one area that we converge is around your paradigm of the blueprint transcending the inner dialogue. So how did that happen for me? Because at its most fundamental core, this is basically saying that the plan, whatever the plan is, and whoever architects the plan, if the plan produces better results, then the loyalty is to the plan rather than to the inner voices. Now, this is, as I say, very archetypal, because you have, at the large scale, you have the benefits and the curse of the dictator king, right? So, for example, I'm in Thailand at the moment. The king that died here recently, one of the things I enjoyed enormously was just how much the Thai people loved their king, were devoted to their king, were proud of their country and their king, right? And then you have the darker side of the dictator. This is for your own good. You're going to do this. Doesn't matter if you want to or not, right? And so that same architecture is a fractal microcosm. And, in the Star Wars, there was order and chaos, right? The Empire and the rebels, right? And of course, that lives in you. And in the American cult, the rebels are the heroes, right? Han Solo, do whatever the fuck he wants. Nobody's going to tell him what to do, right? But of course, you've experienced the anarchy of the rebels inside of you. Bryan gets home 5 o'clock, doesn't want to follow the plan, wants to eat this, wants to do that, doesn't want to sleep, right? And then your life is shot. That's the rebels, right? So, your alliance is with the Empire. Order, impose order, the blueprint. And within the American cult, that's the enemy, that's the bad guy, Darth Vader. And I don't see it that way. I think that in the movement of, in the great walks of time, you have this convergence and then this breakaway. You have this convergence and you have this breakaway. You have the left foot and then the right foot. You have the matriarchy, the patriarchy, and the matriarchy. You have the in-breath, you have the out-breath. And this is also why I don't resonate to don't die. First of all, because it's a negative. But second of all, it's taking one polarity and turning it negative. So live forever would be the positive of that, but it's, which is of course a little bit easier to relate to, but the negativity of saying that half of life, because whenever you have a polarity that is a true polarity, it's half. If you take 2 and you divide it in half, you get 2 equal parts. You take a circle or a sphere and divide it in half, you always get 2 parts. And so whatever is the conceptual polarity, if you cut it in half, and create the polarity, it's not actually real because they can't exist without the other. Right? So the polarity is a mental construct. It's a map that is created as you divide the whole, the circle, the sphere, into 2 illusionary polarities that are interdependent and they reference one another. They're interdependent in an ecological framework. But in dualistic thinking, you can reduce it into black and white. And having pretended that they're separate, you can then say that the black is the bad one, the white is the good one, and then you try to be more white. You try not to die. And I think that this makes enormous amount of sense in context A life is an in-breath. And why should you cut off your in-breath halfway? Why should you cut it off at 3/4? Take the absolute maximum in-breath that you can tolerate, and then let it go, right? It's fixation. When you understand the spherical movement of life, whether it's at the atomic level, at the solar system level, at every level of the fractal, there is this cycle, right? And death becomes birth, and birth becomes death, and death becomes birth. It's like a plane flying around the world. It sets off at the west, but if it just stays true, it will arrive from the east because of the spherical nature of so much of reality. And so live well and die well would be more of my, ideal, in the understanding that to die is to be born, and to be born is to die. For example, old Bryan had to die for the don't die Bryan to be born. And don't die Bryan will have to die for the next iteration in the infinite continuum of evolution to be born. You can't exist in the new iteration without don't die Bryan dying, so that something else can be born. And evolution is the continual iteration in the direction of beauty, truth, goodness, complexity, expansion. From the moment of the Big Bang, time has been getting longer, space has been getting bigger. Relationships have been becoming more chaotic and then more sophisticated, more chaotic and then more sophisticated. The complexity of relationships, the sophistication of energy exchange has been exponentially growing from that moment of the Big Bang. Bigger, longer, more complex in all directions. And you are a part of that. Don't die is a new iteration, a beautiful iteration of complexity, newness. And it would not exist. Don't die wouldn't exist if the Earth had not made it to this number of billions of years. Just 1 billion years earlier, and don't die doesn't exist as a Bryan Johnson identity. Right? And so as the universe, as the time-space continuum expands, the complexity and statistical probability field expands to a point where don't die exists within that framework as a beautiful flower in a moment of time that is unique to you. You honor the time-space continuum by being utterly and completely unique in the way that you're bringing about don't die. But you as a consciousness, you as energy, you as an eternal expression of life, because energy doesn't die, it just changes form. Right now it's Bryan Johnson and don't die. You will never die as energy. Your body, at some point, will be recycled in Earth's ecology, and there will be something else. I've had enough experience that I am a strong believer in some form of consciousness transcending the body. And I always enjoy that consciousness way more than I enjoy body consciousness, except during sex and a few other moments. I love flowers. I love painting. I love dogs, but most of the time that doesn't begin to touch the transcendent ecstasy of the consciousness that is not encumbered by the body. Although, of course, I think we're still a lot, we're trapped a lot in this, in this artificial concept of, consciousness and body. If this is a modulating energy device, every consciousness we have within the body, even perhaps near-death experiences, are modulated, are brought into light, that the body is like a screen for that energy to be projected upon. And so it's quite possible that the NDE experiences are generated by endogenous DMT in the pineal gland, etc. And we don't quite know that, right? But so that the experience of dying is absolutely ecstatic within the aperture of the body, and so we don't know so much, but we do know that life is on a winning streak. That for tens of billions of years, life has been getting bigger and longer, bigger in space, longer in time, more complex, and generating a more sophisticated possibility, probability, and actuality field. Starting with something this big. So why, Buffett, Munger, nothing on life. Life has won every single moment. And life bets on everything. And life wins every time. Life gets bigger. Life gets more complex. Life gets longer. Life is on a winning streak. And so, I have an enormous trust in life, and when I die, life's intelligence to recycle the forms that contain this energy into something else, and into something else, and into something else. I mean, no one has the track record of life. And, as the possibility field expands, it expands in all directions. Horror as well as joy, right? Long forms as well as short forms. Quick death in human terms as well as much longer deaths. And that possibility field is expanding as we speak, right? And so within the next 1,000 years, there will be humans who live much longer than today. And there will be humans who live shorter than today, right? We're going to be terminating embryos and prioritizing others and accelerating, and the possibility field, for better and for worse, as we look through our lens, is expanding in all directions. Right? Neuralink is going to bring about telepathy and love consciousness, and will be used by the CIA to create horrors that we cannot fully understand today, as the possibility field expands in all directions. And life bets on all of it. I also think, particularly in those contexts, that death is one of the kindest things imaginable. That most people today can't even imagine how much horror is possible with brain interfaces in the control of the reptilian brain of the cult, out of greed and fear with massive power imbalances. What a gift to free consciousness from such cruelty. And yet, life continues to turn lemons into lemonade. Right? The military invented the internet to let rich politicians communicate in their nuclear bunkers, and now we have information. Right? And so there is also a cycle by which DARPA fuels the technology of abundance in the future, while murdering, killing, experimenting on various people along the way. So this leads me to the moment that I'm most excited to explore with you, which is this tension between the blueprint, AI, best practices, surrender, control, dictatorship, following the plan, discipline, outcome, the blueprint of best practices, and freedom, and chaos, and rebellion, and individuality, and spontaneity. And I had an experience a little bit like yours recently when I deleted sugar from my diet. And so I love the Tim Ferriss thing that you can do anything for a week, right? So I thought, well, do I want to give up sugar? Not really. Can I try it for a week? Why not? Okay, so no sugar for a week. Fantastic. I enjoyed food more. My energy improved. I was more aware because of the craving for sugar without the consuming of sugar. I was more aware. I was supported by that container. No sugar. No sugar except a cheat day. I also did, what was it? What was it? What's that diet? The ketogenic diet, right? So, working with that for a week, that was harder. It's like, I can't eat artichokes, tomatoes. So I haven't done as much of that, but right now I'm no sugar except for a cheat day. So there's no doubt about it that the plan produces better results. There's also no doubt about it that the plan can easily be a 10x improvement over today. I've actually experienced that in teenage years where, staying up all night, sleeping in the day, doing whatever I wanted, depressed, aimless. I put a structure to my day and increased productivity 400%. Yearly, quarterly, monthly, weekly, and daily goals. Part of that structure, 400% increase in productivity, sense of agency, enjoyment. Just follow the plan. Follow the plan. Order the blueprint. And with AI, the optimal plan for a given individual is going to be more apparent. It's going to be easier to develop an optimal plan. And there's also, no doubt about the paradox between these extremes, right? Because the more discipline you apply, the more freedom you have. The more freedom you have, the less value you have in a certain way, right? And they should like, the more freedom you have, the more discipline you have. That doesn't seem to hold up, right? But there is a lot that, where I was going with this and where it collapsed was, if you look deeply at selfishness and selflessness, they're identical. If you truly scientifically set out to do what's best for the world, that includes you being your best, living your best version of you, which is completely selfish. If you truly, eating pizza, drinking sugar, staying up all night, lying, stealing is not selfish. It's self-destructive, right? If you truly honor the self, you are the greatest thing in the world to the rest of the world, right? And so I'm not, so you can see that with discipline. Like if you invest your money with discipline, you have freedom. I don't, in the moment, see how the freedom leads to the discipline. But I do understand that freedom in and of itself is useless. Like people are always talking about freedom. And it's completely and utterly ridiculous, because it's not how free you are, it's what you do with the freedom that makes the difference. So one of the greatest expressions of freedom is to follow a plan that benefits you and other people. And you're doing that. You're following a plan with your freedom that benefits you, that creates more freedom. I would say that you have more freedom today than before you followed the blueprint. But that's because you used the freedom to surrender to a plan, right? And so there's this tremendous alchemy, and this is the area that I'm most interested in, because you're doing this, in a health protocol. I'm interested in this in a social protocol. Like I'm interested in, as a traumatized child, having children born without all that trauma. So how do you create that plan? The best practice. So in one of my suicide debates, the bar rises to a point like, if I'm going to be in this amount of pain, it's got to be worth it, right? And I don't give a shit about a car or sex or, it's just the things that this cult has to offer are so petty compared to the cruelty of childhood abuse, trauma, betrayal, stupidity, insanity. It's laughable. Like I have no interest in living for any of those things. But is there something to live for? And what is it? What's worth this amount of horror to exist? What is that? And I don't give a shit about skin, hair. I don't give a shit about any of that. I don't even care if it's a 500-year life or a 40-year life. But what I do care about is quality of interaction. And it's the same thought process, the blueprint that generates the most amount of sustainable well-being between two human beings, between a family, is not what those inner voices lead to as they reenact the family system. The blueprint of best practices for work or best practices for diet, but more importantly, lifestyle. Those blueprints are not they diverge wildly from the cult. The cult is, heading off here. The blueprint is leading here. The blueprint does lead to 10x better results. And the benefit of what you're doing, within the capitalist framework is it's very easy to make money, and it's very easy to buy things, and it's very easy to buy services, and it's very easy to test things. And as long as it's in a physical domain, there's also a lot of interest. It's very easy to popularize things like skin and stuff like that. All the women are immediately interested in skin technology and this and that and the other. So what you're doing with Blueprint, I think, is very easy to do in a certain way. The don't die thing, no. But that could just be a decoy we got to have some controversial thing for everyone to argue about, because that's what people like to do, is argue with things. And so got to give them something. Then they can argue about all that. And then meanwhile, they learn some health techniques. I don't know what you're up to with that, since you've already obviously thought very deeply about life, and it's I would certainly bet money in my nonprofit that you will be dead within 300 years. Not that I'd be delighted as long as you're enjoying life. I would just say that would be having formed a nonprofit, 10x Living, to look at blueprints for cultural design, which includes diet. And of course, if that's successful, I'm all for living longer. But I'm stuck in this dynamic. Like, you're working as a totalitarian regime within all the inner Bryans, the 5 p.m. Bryan, the this Bryan, and you're surrendering control to the blueprint. You've obviously got a majority vote within the psyche to do that, or you wouldn't do it. I've had multiple occasions where I had what I thought was a good blueprint going in a good direction, and then a surge of just intense emotional revolt happened. And I had to give up the blueprint because I'm not willing to suppress that outraged of an uprising. Like it's just happened in Iran, right? There's a surge, there's an uprising, they just killed 5,000 people. I'm more of someone to say, like, if that amount of people are protesting my blueprint inside me, okay, let's see what you guys do. Now, that's not because I expect them to succeed or win. In many cases, like if I look at China, the crackdown is better for the Chinese people than the chaos, right? So the Chinese are sticking to their blueprint, as are you. And China is the only country I know of on earth that I like today more than I liked it 20 years ago. Right? And that's an incredible accomplishment. They're following a blueprint, a 50-year plan, a top-down regime. They're doing a lot of blueprint stuff, and it is way better than America in many ways. Right? America is more of old Bryan. Right? You're becoming Chinese in the sense of, this is the plan, I'm sticking to it, don't deviate from the plan, don't rebel against the plan, let's suppress the uprising of the plan. Right? And I'd love to talk with you in more subtlety about that. Like, how do you handle your uprisings? Do you kill them? Do you judge them? Do you imprison them? What do you do with your dissidents? Right? Because that's where I think the real iteration and design, is like we're dealing with the operating systems of transformation and growth. And, you have your own way of doing this. And much like the years, like I had a period of like at least 5 years where my day was broken into 20-minute increments. Wake up this exact minute. Do this exact minute. Then do this, then do yoga, then do this, then do this. I had a blueprint. Well-being was up 300%, productivity up 500%. And one day it broke because, for one thing, it socially isolated me because nobody could fit into my system, and my system was quite rigid, right? And so, that's, and at some point, I guess some part of me wanted to maybe have a girlfriend or something like that rather than be highly productive, right? And so this was the revolt. And the revolt was painful and disorienting and horrific and, ended up leading to food addiction. But it was also, so it was a revolt. But it also, led to some opening, right? And so in the cycle of life and through these polarities, you need the in-breath and you need the out-breath, right? And so, you're looking at selling blueprint because that's helps, Bryan to iterate, right? So these seem to be the big questions. And I'm curious how broad your focus is at the moment. If it's just being the most measured body, but what about the most measured heart and mind? What about the protocols for optimal relationships or cult design? Every culture is a cult. People do it because they do it, because that's the way it's done. It's not scientific. It's not intelligent. You don't look at anything in your cult and say, wow, that's the best way to do this. You just say that's what people do, right? And so that's the area that I'm most interested in. But I think that, like, what I'm interested in is borrowing the best practices. Like, if you create microcultures of 100 people communities that are focused on 10x living, well, maybe we can afford one hyperbaric tank per 100 people and not break the budget. We can certainly do an evening sauna and hot spring, right? And maybe we can grow some of our own food. And what about massage? And like 10x living, to maximize the quality of life and follow a blueprint. But, this is why I'm interested in the dissident conversation, because 95% of all communities break up. Why? Because there are rebels. There are dissidents. Why should we do what Bryan says? Who cares what that internet guy says? We have a right to eat sugar and do this, right? But as you know, you didn't get a hold of your psyche until you changed your diet. You were powerless. I understand that. So as soon as the community rebels against certain core fundamental practices, the community goes to hell, because because the diet feeds parts in the psyche that have no interest in well-being. They have interest in reenactment, or they have interest in killing themselves, or whatever it is. I think I have a massage. All right, so I'll wrap this up. But you're obviously part of this larger network of 10x design and this conversation between, pretty soon we're going to have scientifically backed, verifiable blueprints created by AI with documented evidence that if everyone will do this, there will be 3 times more happiness and 3 times better environment and all of this, toxins coming out of the air and all that. And so this is the conversation of our age. When we know that, right, how do we transition to that? So I invite you to a conversation about the very much bigger conversation of blueprints and personal autonomy within the framework of those blueprints. And thanks for all your work.